people talk about diversity a lot and how many, so there's that difference between the diversity programs or diversity effort in a startup, medium-sized companies, and also a corporate. We were talking about how the larger corporate companies, they'll go into a 12-month planning, and then there's a diversity program, and then whether or not it's going to be a hit or miss, or it's going to be a fail one or an achievable one, you probably won't see the results until 3-5 years down the line, and that's quite typical. I came from IBM, so I sort of got that experience in undergoing long-term planning for something that you really don't know if whether or not that's going to be achievable. And then I sort of moved on to work in a startup. I worked in a very small startup when there were about 8 people, and then I was also in an environment where we grew up to about 300 people, and then now I'm in a sort of medium-sized startup again. And so what I really wanted to talk about today is the difference of how when we think that we need to understand diversity in order to attract tech talent, it's actually very different in terms of, and it's very dependent on the sort of company size that you're actually in and the sort of environment, and more importantly, we'll also touch a bit about how it's not just a HR job. I know it's a recruitment conference, so probably most of us are in that background or currently in the role responsible for doing that and championing that effort. But there's also that significant problem in the industry right now, especially in tech, that the founders or CEOs or your managers or leadership actually expect HR or talent to actually try and champion this effort without any sort of input, without any sort of support, and that's the reality. So again, I want to say that everything that I'm talking about today is basically from my experience. So if you do disagree, we've got a Q&A later, so you can try and fight with me and challenge me on that. So we'll start off with talking about why diversity is so important. I said earlier that a lot of people have their own perceptions about what diversity is, and then we've also obviously heard about the fact that we are arguing between diversity and equality. Where do you actually draw the sign in the land? Draw the line in the sand. So I want to, before I go into that, I want to talk about how I actually got to where I am and why I do the things I love to do. Being in tech was sort of a choice for me, but it all goes back to how I grew up, and I was always sort of like in a family where my dad and my brother were talking about cars all the time. Mum was always off working, so I was sort of like alone at home, and I never felt that I really belonged. So at that point, I sort of felt like if I knew more about cars, or if I liked the stuff that other people liked, then maybe I would feel a bit more belong. So that was 20 years ago. And well, we don't even talk about the word inclusion, right? And that's why we want to do what we want to do today. It all started off like that. And so I went on because I had that mentality, and I always wanted to do everything I can to be included in a bigger group, because that wasn't just my passion, but I also felt like because I was a girl, I wasn't really included in that group, although I love cars as much as other kids did. So I went into engineering and became an engineer for a little bit. I still felt like I was not just a minority, but it was also the fact that, yes, there are lecturers. Well, the industry has changed, and you get a bit more included in most of the activities that you were doing. And because of that, I had lecturers supporting me. My team members were great. So throughout the entire journey that I had in uni, although I did mechanical engineering, so you can imagine how we were literally just 8 of us in the entire 4-year cohort. So that was really, really small number of females. It wasn't that kind of environment where all the females had to gang up or we had each other's back. It was more, for the first time I felt that I was really included, and I could talk about the things that I love. I was actually heard because of the things that I actually enjoy doing. I'm a rev head, and that's what the Australians call you when you love cars. So I went on being an engineer for a little bit and then got pulled out and then fell into recruitment, like most of us do. Recruitment wasn't so much of a choice when I decided, okay, I wanted to do that as a job when I graduated. But I was sort of in engineering, I started talking to a lot of people, and then I developed this passion for actually helping other engineers find their dream job. I wasn't exactly in my dream job, to be fair. I was a graduate engineer, so that was a 3-year program, and then you did a lot of all these kind of training. And it was only until I went into marketing that I realized I don't want to be an engineer anymore. So I did everything I can to want to be included, but then it wasn't so much of the passion. I didn't like the job that I was doing day in, day out. And then I moved on from automotive into tech, into IT again. There were a lot more challenges when you move. So automotive is very different. How many in the raise of hand actually came from an automotive industry? No one? Okay. So the automotive industry is very different. You don't talk about, so you hear about General Motors or Ford. They talk about inclusion, they talk about diversity, they talk about equality, and all of this is because they look at manufacturing. Manufacturing is one of those industries inside of automotive that it's filled with men over women, and that's a big problem. But not because women don't want to do that job, it's because they don't feel safe, and that's why you hear about sexual harassment, they hear about harassment and all these kind of cases in manufacturing. But automotive, to be fair, as compared to the tech industry, which is what we're in now, is at least 5 to 10 years behind what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to champion in tech. There's a lot of things that they don't talk about. So no matter how you feel you will go to HR, that's not really exactly the safe place that you go to. It's because the general perception of automotive is quite harsh. So when I was an engineer, I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. And it was only until I went into recruitment, when I was dealing with HR, I was dealing with the candidates, that I realized there was 0 female applying for your jobs at all. It was a big company. I worked for both General Motors and Ford. There was just no female applying for the job. So you can put in all the effort that you want. You can use Textio or what we have now, or you can rephrase your job descriptions to spell out female words, like what we call it now. But that's still never going to achieve what you're trying to achieve. So I got a lot of struggles when I was in engineering, and for a number of reasons, I moved on to tech, and then suddenly I realized that tech actually is a little bit more advanced, actually a lot more advanced, and it actually allowed a lot of people to want and achieve these things. So I started meeting managers. Yes, there are large companies that also came from IBM. So you've got managers who only want to hire their own kind. So that's your problem with trying to achieve diversity, right? Because your managers want to hire their own kind, they speak the same lingo, they have the same thought process, and they make the same kind of decisions. Then you've got, and then I come across managers who just want equality. They want their female staff and their male staff to be able to do the exact same job based on their skills, their experience, and their talent. So there were a mix of a bunch of people. And then I got lucky enough to move into a startup. That's when I realized this is my place, and this is sort of like my playground for trial and error and also experiment. When you're in a startup, when I was first in a startup, it was about 8 people. And what happened there then is that was one single most important question that I asked the founder when I came in as a head of HR. It was basically him saying to me that I want everybody in my company to be happy, and I want my people to be happy. How can I achieve that? So then I asked him, what do you mean by your people being happy, for instance? Do you want to pay people the right way? Is it the benefits that you're talking about? Are they well-being benefits, for instance, or social outing? You know what it's like when you talk about a startup, you think about a ping pong table or a foosball table on 2 sides of the office. It's very typical, right? So I had that perception because it was my first time in a startup. So I asked him, does it mean that you want a fancy, bright, colorful office where everybody is happy? And then I realized he said, I just want my people to be happy. And he said, I'll let you do whatever that you need to do to make sure that people actually feel safe. They feel that this is a job that they want to do because they actually love doing what they're doing, and they want to rock up every morning. It's because they're motivated to come on this journey with me and achieve not just my dreams, as dreams of ours. That's when I realized that when people start talking about diversity and they talk about them, especially leaders, then they're probably not the right people to lead it. But if they talk about us and they talk about their people and they truly, truly care, that's when you find the common grounds. You want to achieve this for them and you want to embark on this journey with them because they share the same values and they share the same beliefs. So that's a little bit of a nutshell why I do what I do now. And like I said, my methods might not be the most accurate for everybody. It might work, it might not work. But basically what I'm going to go through today is what I've done throughout the career, and it's actually helped make people feel a little bit more safe and feel that it's the right place for them to be. So when I was in tech and throughout my career as well, I realized that there were 3 main challenges in trying to achieve diversity. The first thing was that it's very natural for people to find their own kind, like I was saying, and it's also very natural for people to put people in boxes. So for instance, you can be an engineer, you can be a developer, so all of these boxes. But more importantly, the industry puts people into 2 different kind of boxes, and that's the pinks and the blues, basically the female and the male. And when you put people in small boxes like that, you know that you are going to fail in diversity, right, and equality, because the fact is there is a difference, but there's actually no difference, sorry. There's no difference between a woman who can code and a man who can code, because let's think about it. When you're in tech hiring, you put the same people through the same tech tests. They do the same pairing test, and then they go through the same phone screening, and then at the end of that journey, your manager or your leadership will ask you, how come we're not achieving these targets that we set out for? How come we're not hiring more women? And then you hear people talking about, oh, because there is actually lack of women in the industry altogether. But think about it, right? It's a circular economy. When there are going to be companies where they portray a lifestyle for women to go and work for them, then the women will go and work for them. The same number of women exist in the industry altogether. Then you suddenly realize that there's a flock of women that go into one single company, and then this particular company who's trying to do whatever they can but didn't really understood the fundamental rights of the effort will lose out in all the women. So then they suddenly start screaming and start saying that there's not enough women, so let's do something else. But then nobody also thinks about the fact that you also, if the number is limited, what do? People cannot grow up to suddenly in a year's time, or in a year's time have 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, and 200,000 more women to become really, really talented developers. Everybody needed time to gain that experience and then pursue their dreams and be a developer. So some of the companies which has a support system, for instance, like larger companies, would have a support system to run diversity programs or to run mentoring programs. So therefore, you organically, internally improve not your numbers, I wouldn't say numbers, again, those are boxes, but you would organically improve the talent internally and encourage your female staff to become developers, but you start internally. Then there are some really good companies out there that has a support system where they go out and they do work experience, for instance, to make sure that that generation gap is also achieved. Nothing is ever going to be achieved overnight. And when you're in a startup, the biggest problem in a startup is your leadership would expect this to change overnight because they think that, okay, well, we've got 5 people, right? It's okay to hire another 5 developers. Then we've got 50-50 because all you really look at is the numbers. You've got 50% of female, we've got 50% of male, and the only thing they think about, again, it's back to that pink and blue boxes. Or they will suddenly have a great celebration after 12 months because, hey, you know what? We've got 12% female and most of our competitors only have 8%. Again, it becomes a number game. So that was one of the problems that I've noticed in all of the industries, and that's why when we want to try and do something like that, if it's your role, if it's your responsibility to try and achieve diversity, you really need to take people out of that mentality of actually putting people in those boxes. Then there's like cultural differences. What do you think right now when you look at the person right next to you or your colleagues, people that you hang out with in the office, what do you think are your common grounds? Most of the time, there are beliefs, they are religion, there are things that they gather as their values, their principles. But as a human being and as an individual, you are completely okay to allow yourself to just like the people that you like, right? Because it's a personal choice. You can go off and like people of your same kind, you speak the same language. When I say language, not necessarily language, but like, you know, how developers speak to each other as if like they're the only people in the room. So you want to look for your own kind, but when you're in a work environment, you definitely don't want to be doing that because maybe you're not connected to your colleagues because of that similar common grounds. But the fact is, most of the companies don't even encourage their staff to find those common grounds. How many of you right now who have lunch with a certain colleague, say colleague A, that you know what their background is? Do you actually spend enough time to understand whether or not they're a great person or what their values are, what their beliefs are, and things like that? So to start with, companies and leadership nowadays don't encourage people to get to know people on a very personal level. I'm not saying that you need to share every single thing that happened in a day. Those are worthless. But at the same time, without that kind of common ground, you know that you don't have respect for that individual. And respect usually is the underlining thing to help you achieve diversity or not. Then there's that misperception of abilities. It goes back to the point where I said, a woman who can code and a man who can code, what really is the difference? How many of us are developers? None? And is everybody in tech at the moment? Yeah? What do you think one of the main misperception of abilities that you see while you're recruiting for tech people? See, that's a very typical challenge, right? But then the thing there is, sometimes we also try and achieve those numbers. How many times have your manager or your leadership told you that it's probably your job in recruiting, because it's the forefront of that cycle, to bring in the female or to attract the female to start with? Sometimes they'll say, hey, HR or TA, can you make sure that we get more female female people applying for your jobs? Then there's one metric. And then you go on to the next step. Again, it's the life cycle. Then you go on to the next step. Oh, how many of them got through to the next rounds? They don't really look at how many got through to the next rounds until how many you have hired, because the middle ground is where you should be testing. But when you look at it closely, and you look at the life cycle closely, you need to start that effort from the very start of it. Sometimes you hear people say, oh, we need to make sure that our job description, for instance, in a startup, this is really interesting. You talk about how our job description is too aggressive to the women because it says get shit done, right? So many of the startups say get shit done, and it scares the women away. Why? I mean, it didn't scare me away. Maybe I'm an outlier, but why? Then they say that, oh, you don't want to go into a startup because there's no work-life balance. Loads of. So you get two contradicting values. The founders and the leadership will say, we're on a long journey. We're gonna create this best product for a diverse set of customers, and then there's no diversity inside your company. So where is that diverse mindset coming from? How are you going to create that product for a diverse set of people for the world? Where is that where is that thought process? How are you making decisions? Is it just by customer insights, or is it just by customer feedback? But truth be told, a lot of startups can't even afford customer insight or a customer engagement team to start with, because it's all about tech. It's all about build. And as soon as we get a product out into the market and into the hands of the customer, then we'll figure out the rest. And that's why I say it's so important to make sure that you've got the fundamentals right when you want to achieve diversity. Again, it's not a shortcut. It's not something that's going to change overnight. You need to start from the very start. If you think that putting the word "get shit done" out there is going to scare your female out, do A/B testing. It's not that hard. Don't be lazy. It has to start as a full life cycle. It's not going to be something that you think, okay, we've done that a little bit, we'll parachute in halfway down the project, and then we'll sort of like mix things up a bit, and then we'll figure out what happens in the next steps. Again, it goes back to the point where when you're in a larger organization, a program takes 12 months to plan. When you're in a startup, you get to plan something overnight. And it's okay, because we learn from our failures when you're in a startup, and then you make sure you don't do the same again. So again, we talked about where do we start, right? It starts from the very start of that life cycle. We talked about how you should be looking for common grounds. If you're not talking to your colleagues and you're not finding common grounds with each other, not because you like the Great Bake Off, but common grounds outside of all of them that actually make you a team and build a team together. You hear a lot about how do you make great teams, or how do you build great teams overnight, and how do you make sure people work cohesively together. That's all part and parcel of it, because once you've got the common grounds, whether or not it's motivators, whether or not it's the same achievements or the same challenges that they go through and the same learnings, you'll end up finding a group of people who are very cohesive. It's the same thing as diversity. It's different kind of people who wants to make decisions together, not because they want to make the same kind of decisions and be included like how I used to feel, but it's about making sure that whatever that you say is heard, and it's also complementary to someone else that's right next to you. That's what it means by being a team. Skills and experience are also one of those things that you can call common ground. Maybe you've come from a different background. Maybe you've worked in a different place. Maybe you've worked in similar companies that shared similar values and principles. So that's made who you are. So you've got similar values and principles. Or if you've worked in a really, for instance, you've worked in a really sort of aggressive, male-dominated sort of environment, and then you come into this new place, you've met someone like-minded, they had the same kind of challenge, that's common ground. So that's the kind of experience you want to build on. That's the kind of background knowledge that you want to build on. Skills, on the other hand, when you've got the right skills, nobody can tell you that you're different from another person, because it's skills. Experience you can learn, talent and skills is something that you're taught. You come out from university, you read the same textbooks, you've gone through the same lectures, 300 people will come out from the uni. Yes, there are some better grades and some not so good grades, but technically your skills are exactly the same. So why are we even differentiating people based on their skills? Beliefs, like what I said earlier, it's what you believe in. You want to work, so if you're a HR professional or a talent professional that's supposed to champion in this effort, and your leadership actually don't believe in their people, you've got no common grounds there. Run. I mean, my word of advice is run, because what are you trying to do? You're fighting the exact same battle every day, because you cannot change someone's belief. Language, communication, how do you communicate with each other? Cultural diversity is not just something that everybody speaks the same. It's not about people of a group that speaks the same language. It's about people who share the same kind of communication style, for instance. There are speakers groups, there are, I don't know, there are different kind of communication groups and so forth. And sometimes when you look past just the surface, people are connected on a lot of levels because of these kind of common grounds. And these are just some of the examples that I found. So we talked about how a lot of leaders, if you are currently in a role where it's your responsibility to achieve that, It's your role to put in input to make sure that the program actually works if you're in a larger corporation. Or sometimes it could be the fact that you are in a standalone HR role in whatever companies, whatever size companies, and it is your job to fix all of these problems. So we want to talk about how leaders and leadership has this wrong perception of why HR is the only person and the only team that is responsible for fixing this problem. Again, diversity isn't a problem, or gender gap isn't a problem that exists today, and we've only found out today or overnight. It's been decades and decades and decades in different kind of industries, right? Are you basically saying that all the HR professionals in the last 2-3 decades haven't done a good enough job, and that's why we can't achieve diversity today? That's bullshit. Because what we don't realize is that it's leadership that are making the decisions, and leadership is the one that's actually telling HR to achieve something or work on something when they don't have their blessing, because you don't run the company. You run the company for them, you execute their dreams, and you execute their plans. But it's leadership that's supposed to be in the role of making decisions and to make sure that they're giving you all the support that you want and you can have to make sure that you achieve these ones. So very, very typical on a HR day-to-day, like my day, is when I have the CEO comes to me and say, well, you know what, company morale is a bit low at the moment, it's dipped, I don't know why, and also there are some complaints showing up on Glassdoor. Can you fix it, please? Automatically, they think, okay, so there's a problem, we need to fix it, this is HR's job. If it means that women are feeling not as safe in the environment or in the workplace, let's bring more women in. That's an easy fix, right? Because your leadership tells you to do that. They think that, okay, the only person that should ever own a Glassdoor page is HR or talent. Then they also talk about how, hey, let's try and fix this gender gap thing. What can we do? HR goes away, you go into reactive mode straight away because you want to fix this problem overnight. Again, I told you, it's been existing for a long time now. In order for you to fix this problem overnight, so many, it's frustrating for me, but so many companies, they go, how about we create female roles? What are they? What are these female roles in tech? Oh, you know what? Hire more people in marketing, that's fine. I know you're in shock, but reality is I've heard loads of managers actually say that to me. Let's create these female roles so that we can bring the numbers up, because it's a number game. You want to look good on the outside. You want to be able to promote your company. It goes back to the whole Glassdoor thing, right? And your employer branding. You want to be able to promote your company as, hey, this is a lifestyle of choice or workplace of choice because we've got this blend of people, and then they take nice pictures of like women in a social outing. And then I've even heard that there are some managers, this is from my experience, that we've went out to a social outing and there were 4 female, well, the company actually has more, there were 4 amongst 18 or up to or 20. Took a really nice photo. That photo actually tells you the company's lifestyle. Everyone's engaged, there was a picnic, everyone's happy. It's truly a place you want to be if you're driven by passion and you're motivated by that. It's a place where you want to come and achieve your dreams and so forth. That was the employer branding. But funnily enough, there was someone who popped up and said, hey, I don't think that picture should go on social because there's not enough female in that picture. So think about it, right? It's the whole perception of society. Just because you've got 5 amongst the 18 doesn't necessarily mean that the 5 are actually unhappy. Have we ever done anything, if you're in that role at the moment, or your leadership, have you ever actually done anything to ask the question, to ask the females who are actually in that safe environment that when they actually feel happy, or even after you've achieved your diversity program, say you've rolled it out and you wanted to hit 50% and you've finally done it, have you ever gone back into the feedback loop and asked those people who've been part of your experience and that experiment, how do they feel? Do they actually feel happy Do they feel like this worked? Do they feel like you've definitely created a great environment for me? Now I feel like I'm equal. Now I feel like I'm empowered and I'm motivated to work hard. A lot of programs, once you hit the finishing line, you don't go back and think about this. Feedback loop is so important. It's making sure that what you're doing is successful, but not to the extent where you're forgetting about what's fundamentally right. You want to make sure that the people who are involved in your experiment also get a say. So what you should be doing, we talked about HR earlier. We talked about how your leadership will tell you, hey, it's a Glassdoor problem. Can you go fix it? Can you create more female roles? Again, this is part of my experience. If you've got anything else, definitely raise it later, because I'll be really interested to know. We talked about how if your leadership isn't giving you enough support, you need to ask them, what are their beliefs? What do they want for their people? If you can't reach your CEO, then at least your manager needs to be able to translate that message and that vision down to you. Why are you trying to work hard? Like everything else in life, you need to have a compass, and your CEO and your leadership is your compass. Before you go down that route, before you set yourself a direction, if you don't agree in the belief, for instance, I've worked with a company where they just do not believe in their people. Not because they don't believe in their people's talent and skills, because they think that everybody should be remunerated in a benefit sort of way. If we pay higher salaries than other companies, then we're winning. But that's fine, right? But I don't have common grounds with their leadership, so therefore I cannot run that program because I kind of feel like I'm setting it up for failure. A lot of times you would think that you can do this on your own, but actually not. It's the stakeholders. You've got your managers in place. You've got talent people in place. You've got other teams in place. Even when you're hiring for tech, you don't make the final decisions, do you? You can hire for cultural fit. You can hire for cultural inclusion, anything you want to call it, but you're not the final decision maker. So who's actually part of your stakeholders, and who's going to make sure that your program actually is successful? It's the rest of the people. You need to make sure that your beliefs are aligned in some way or not. It's very hard, obviously, to make sure that you find that perfect manager that you want to work for. A lot of us go through a career experience where we don't necessarily find a manager that we agree 100% with. But again, it comes back to the common grounds. I don't need to be your best friend. I just need to understand that if you want me to execute something like this, what is it that you want from your people? What is it that you want for your people as well? Again, if you share the same beliefs, then you execute. And if you don't, you really need to move on, because then eventually you don't realize that you're actually part of the problem. If you go into a company and you don't believe in your leadership, and then you take up this job and you think that this is my responsibility, I'm going to run with it, I'm going to achieve this one day because I could do this on my own. And then you continue on, you continue on, you continue on, you hit a brick wall, you fight the same battles, eventually you're going to burn out yourself. And then what happens? 12 months down the line, you've achieved nothing. Then you become part of the problem because someone else could have been doing it, or they could not have been wanting to do it at all to start with because they don't really believe in, say for instance, they don't believe in achieving diversity or equality. People should just come and work for us because we're a great company, we've got great benefits. We talked about leadership. How many of us in the room right now are actually in a position to, say, make decisions for your diversity program? You're part of the effort as well. You're part of the team, or you're telling your team to actually do this. Cool. What's your biggest challenge? But why do you think they don't understand it?
Well, from my perspective, I think, well, it's 2% female, but it's always been done a certain way. It's very old and fancy. So it's getting them to understand the importance of it.
So why do you think then they suddenly thought, okay, if things have worked out the same way, it's obviously working for us, there's 2%, why the sudden need of change? Cool. So that's very typical, right? It's very typical that either you're in a leadership role that you make all the calls of how you want to run this program, or you have leadership that tells you, yeah, well, I do want to achieve that, but I'm not going to be fully 100% committed to it because I'm making decisions. Maybe it costs me too much money because you're running activities, socials, and things like that to promote that kind of lifestyle or encourage it. Or then you've got leaders who say, yeah, I like the effort, let's hire someone to do it for me. It's very typical. You hire someone in to do it for you, and then you don't give them the support, they end up failing. And then you question, how come my company doesn't succeed in these kind of things? How come PwC can do it? Well, because they have a support program, and they have a support system that you're not giving your staff. So we want to talk about how leadership in all of your roles, what role do they play and how can they help you if you're not in that role? You want to be asking them the question, what do they want for their people? What do they want? What do they see as success? I've worked for very different leadership. I'll give you an example. I've worked for someone who doesn't, it's not believing in the people, it's more like, that's fine, everyone's replaceable. So, well, that's fine then. You don't want to talk about well-being, you don't want to talk about benefit, you want to just make sure that, hey, everyone has a job description, this is what they're hired for, they come in, they do the job. If they're not happy, off they go, it's fine. It's a revolving door, but we're actually happy about it. Leadership was actually proud of it because they know that they're recycling the best talent in the market until obviously they exhaust it. But nobody thinks that far, 5 years down the road. If they exhaust the market and they exhaust the tech market and all the developers don't want to work for you 5 years down the road, that's fine. We'll move offices, we'll go somewhere else, we'll exhaust another market. There's always a way out. And because of that, your leaders start creating that escape route for themselves because they think that it's okay, I can get away with this. I don't have to be fully 100% committed. And there are leaders like that. I've experienced that myself. And then on the other hand, sometimes you're lucky enough to find someone who just says and calls their people as us. They never say them because they don't sit in this bubble that they sit up there and they think that they make all the decisions and they determine how your livelihood should look like. They basically go, well, are my people happy? If not, what can we do? Every management meeting, you talk about how, hey, there's stress level. Are we looking at that? Allocate it down to people, decide who your executors are, and things like that. So that those are great managers and those are great leadership. But sometimes, unfortunately, in an industry like ours, we still get that balance of both sides. So therefore, the first thing you want to ask your leadership is, what do they really want to achieve out of this? If you know that you're going to fight a battle on an everyday single basis, go somewhere else, do something different, and fight for someone else that you actually have that common grounds and that shared belief in. Again, you want to make sure that they're fully committed. No more half-hearted energy, no more half-hearted support. If you want me to do this, I'll draw you a plan, and I'll do this for you because it's my experience. I want the best for your people. Let me execute it, but what do you want? Make sure you ask those questions and make sure they are 100% fully committed in supporting you. Fund their common interests. For instance, if you feel like there are a group of people who wants to play football together, then make sure you fund it. It's all about that social. It's all about creating that common ground. Sometimes it's little efforts like this. You do a town hall, you bring people together, you celebrate the company's success. Why not? You get some cupcakes, you get some food. It's okay. These are small efforts that you can play, and this is your part as well to play. Then you've got the bigger part, which is giving your HR all the success, all the support that they need. As an ecosystem, what part do you play? Each and every individual in this space at the moment, no matter what role you play, what responsibilities you have, you've got a role to play in making sure that this is a success. Are you finding common grounds with with your colleagues. For instance, what are you doing? Are you making sure that you are being a mentor, or you're recognizing yourself as a mentee or a buddy, helping your team out, making sure that everybody has that support? It's your part to play. You will need support one day, and you will have to give support one day. We want to look at how proactive you are at the moment. If you're not currently in a role, and if you think that you're outside of that scope for actually trying to achieve diversity, what role have you been playing recently? Any raise of hand? What have you done when you, okay, so I want you to think about the word inclusion, right? And I want you to think about a recent activity or a recent something that you've done for your coworkers that you think was promoting that inclusion. Again, this is not your HR role. This is not because you are in that responsible role. This is about you as an individual, as the ecosystem. What have you done recently? Surely you've done something. No leaders turn up. Okay. But what was the agenda? Was it just coming together? Okay. So someone's played a part. Who else? Surely you've done something. You've got to give me something. Yeah? Okay. So that's the kind of, we do that in the office as well. We call it Donut, because Slack has an app called Donut, and you randomly pick people every fortnight, and then you're actually supposed to have coffee, either virtual coffee or physical coffee, depending on how well you know the person or if they're remote or not. So it sort of forces people, obviously you're going to get pushback like everywhere else, it forces people to get to know one another outside of that team, outside of the people that you work with. It's very easy for sometimes people like us in HR, or like me in HR, TA, you technically get the opportunity to know everybody because you'll be part of that process of bringing them in. But not so much for the other people. Some developers in San Francisco would have never met someone in London, for instance, and Donut actually helps that. So that's part of a little bit of the effort that you're trying to do as well to make sure that people feel included. But there's so much more you can do. Again, so how many people in the room right now, and I've got 2 answers, that basically means it's down to you as well. You're not doing enough. So don't rely on HR to put this program out when you're not even participating in it. You need their support, and they would need your support as well. Everybody's got a place in the world, and everybody's got a part to play. Leadership will give you the support. Yes, we've talked about how some are bad leaders, some are not. And then we've talked about how HR can continue to promote this, but every single person has a role to play. So I want to give you a few points in terms of what you can do and what you can do immediately to make a change. Companies cannot just sit back anymore. Think about it. It's not a competition. It's okay if my competitors have 1% more of female developers than me. It's fine, but I'm in a happy environment. I love my job. I love being where I am. I've got a support system. Numbers will not tell me otherwise how I feel. But companies cannot sit back. That means you need to start using your network. Learn from your competitors. Learn from other people in your network. What have they done? What have they not done? And what's worked for them? take that input, and make sure you're not competing against yourselves to achieve something that's greater and that's actually bigger than yourself, because it's not a challenge. It's not a challenge that you need to win. It's for everybody, okay? When you're talking about hiring, you want to make sure that you've got collective, unbiased hiring decisions. And how do you make that work? You need to make sure your management is diverse. Have you ever been in one of those meetings where you're in that meeting, day in, day out, the same management meeting, everything's inconclusive? No one's making decisions. You know why? Not because no one's dare enough to make decisions. Everybody was made out of the exact same mold. Same background experience, same industry experience. You don't know anything else outside of anything. There's no diverse management, so therefore, you can't make collective, unbiased decisions because there's no other difference or there are no other experiences in the room. Everyone's trying to fight against each other. This has got nothing to do with passive-aggressive anymore. It's just the same kind of people trying to fight against each other and trying to fight with each other, challenging on the exact same topic. They don't know anything else outside of that circle. And that's why diverse management is so important. And that's going to help you achieve what you want to achieve. Because imagine it's the same thing. You want to find that common grounds, but sometimes you need to make sure that the common grounds go beyond your industrial experience or your work experience. Not everybody who works in an automotive industry comes from an automotive background. That's how you get diverse mentalities. Your hiring criteria, your skills, your experience, your contribution. How many of you right now, if you're in that role, do think that your company has an immersive or an inclusive hiring process? And what does that mean to you? That's good. What does that mean to you? How do you find that working? At what point in that life cycle does it work until it stops? So that's specifically targeting on their skills and their experience, right? That's perfect. See, not a lot of companies nowadays, who else do you think you've got an inclusive hiring process at the moment? None? So if you don't start from the start, and the very start of the life cycle, like I've said, how do you think you're going to achieve that final goal at the end of that life cycle? It starts at the end. It starts at the start, right? It's not something that you think, hey, I want to parachute in midway, and because I've done this in the past, so therefore I'm going to bring all my experience in and I'm going to help you achieve this. It doesn't work like that. There's one thing I sort of always argue about, which is you don't really want to hire for cultural fit anymore. So it's a misperception of what cultural fit actually means. That's the breaking point of why you can't achieve diversity. Because when you're hiring for cultural fit, you're hiring your same kind, aren't you? And how many companies do you think out there has, say, 5 values and 5 principles? Their values are usually get shit done in a startup, or you know, results outcome over process, and things like that. These are very common, but basically you're also hiring the exact same kind of people. You put people in boxes. You want to hire the same kind of, not just mentality, but the same kind of personality. Remember how sometimes you hear this conversation going around. It says, startups are very aggressive for the environment. So some people survive, some people don't. And for you to survive, you sort of have to be a challenger. I wrote an article on that. Reality is, it's true. it actually works for some startup. It works for some companies because, hey, everybody's on the same journey. Everybody speaks the same lingo. And when you want to make decisions, you can achieve it. Because you know what? XYZ understood what I meant and finishing my sentences. Basically, you're looking for a partner in life. And that's why you hire for cultural fit, because you're hiring the exact same type of people. But when you want to achieve diversity, you cannot hire for cultural fit anymore. I've been in a company where the only thing we want to hire for is cultural fit because it works for us. We're proud of it. There are a lot of people who will come through the process. We don't even talk about or set ourselves up for failure for talking about hiring with unconscious bias or blind tests. No, we want the exact same kind because it works for us. We're in a product company where we're trying to push a product out and the best product out into the market for 2 years. And the 2-year sprint of that company means you want to hire the exact same kind of people because you've got no time to lose. People come in, they do their best job, out they go. They come in, they do their best job, out they go. We were proud of it because that was what we set ourselves up for. My leadership told me, I don't want diversity. I want the exact same kind of people because we're going to make decisions. I don't want a diverse set of people who are going to counteract sometimes and slow things down. But that's the kind of company that don't even want diversity, and that's okay. Let them be. But if you're in a role and you want to achieve diversity, then you cannot hire for cultural fit anymore. You want to make sure that you're hiring for inclusion and acceptance. It's the same thing as hiring people who are different but share the same common grounds. What do we get out of it? I think it's quite obvious now that if this is what you set your journey to be and this is what you want to achieve, you're going to get a few things like acceptance. Again, back to my other example of a company who doesn't want diversity. It's fine. I mean, we live with it and we think that it's okay because the only thing that we had set in our mind of that goal is to bring in as much people as possible and to make sure that people actually achieve and they can build this product. It was a product-based company rather than two different things. They're a product-based company rather than a people-based company. They would never want to be known as the employer of choice, but they only want to be known as creating the best product out into the market. And that's fair, and that's okay, because they were honest about it. It's the same thing that goes back to your job description. How are you writing your job descriptions now? Are you writing down the visions and the goals for the company, or is it just based on your own perception? I know sometimes there are different layers, and if you're in TA, you write the description, and then I've done that. I write the description, and then I get the job spec from hiring managers, and then I go back to my desk, and then I write that job spec. But then at the start of that blurb, it's changed so long. Cool, 2 minutes. So yes, we wanna make sure you will know that what you'll get out of it is acceptance. I'm gonna quickly wrap this up. The accommodation to belief as well. You've got that common grounds. If you've got diversity, people will let you be who you are. Equality comes naturally. Once you've got the non-same kind of people, you're going to start achieving equality because then you're treating people the way you should be treating them. Creating the inclusive workplace is the #1 thing you're going to get out of it. Again, just because I'm different doesn't mean I can't do that job. And if I'm feeling included, remember I told you the story about how I wasn't feeling included because I wasn't included, I wasn't part of the group, although I love the exact same things, I'm passionate about the same thing, I can speak the exact same sentences, but I wasn't included. It's the exact same thing that you want to achieve. When you've got diversity, you're going to get an inclusive workplace, and it doesn't matter who you are anymore, it's the job that you are doing. I like to say this, that for the love of tech, remember we talked about the example. If you want to create a product that's going to deliver a set of expectations to a diverse set of customers, you need to have that diverse mindset. Again, like what I said, it's do what you love. If you're not feeling included in the role that you're currently doing, not just because of the role that you're doing or your talent or your experience, but if you're not feeling included, although you share the exact same passion, then you know you're in the wrong place.